Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for being here. Apologies that we're getting started a few minutes late, but we wanted to let some of the late arrivals get situated. Thanks to everybody for being here. We've got a good program, I think. We've got some wonderful panelists that are going to provide some good information about hemp and CBD. So my name is Brad Keaton. I'm a partner at Stoll Keenon Ogden here in Louisville. I chair the firm's antitrust trade regulation practice, and I'm also team lead for our hemp and CBD practice. We also have here with us Joe Bilby, who is general counsel for the Kentucky Department of Agriculture, Charles Weiss, who is commissioner with the Kentucky Department of Financial Institutions, and Annie Franklin, project manager with the Kentucky Cabinet for Economic Development. So I'm going to take a few minutes to kick us off here, and actually before I get started, a couple of things. We will be doing questions going to be submitted by phone, so if you look in your materials, I believe it's on the top of the agenda, there are some instructions. There's a little website you can go to and submit questions that way, and then we'll do the Q&A portion at the end. But as questions come into your mind as we're working through this, feel free to go ahead and submit them, and we'll be working through those. So I'm going to start by taking a few minutes to talk about sort of a little bit of history, how we got where we are right now with hemp, with CBD, particularly at the federal level. I think Joe is going to give us some of the historical flavor here in Kentucky, but I'm going to take a few minutes and talk about the federal level. So really everything started, I think it's fair to say, with the passage of the 2014 Farm Bill. Prior to that, hemp was treated, generally speaking, at the federal level the same as marijuana. There was really no distinguishment, besides a few I'll get to in a moment. And so the 2014 Farm Bill, it authorized agricultural pilot programs in states where industrial hemp production was legal. It defined industrial hemp for the first time as being something different than marijuana, and defined as the plant Cannabis sativa L, any part of such plant, whether growing or not, with a delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol concentration of not more than 0.3% on a dry weight basis. But one of the problems we had, there was a clear conflict with the Controlled Substances Act. So notwithstanding the passage of the 2014 Farm Bill, under the CSA, all cannabis, including hemp, remained a Schedule I controlled substance, which is the most restrictive scheduling. I won't read through this whole definition of marijuana that was contained in the CSA. There were a few exceptions, though. It excluded mature stalks, products produced therefrom, like fiber, oil, or cake, as well as sterilized seeds and capable of germination. So at the time, under the CSA and DEA regulations, possession of any portion of the cannabis plant, including hemp, was legal only if that portion was both excluded from the definition of marijuana and contained no measurable THC. And if it contained measurable THC, then it had to be both excluded from the definition of marijuana and either processed plant material or animal feed mixture. So there was a lot of confusion. The DEA appropriations bill that came out around the same time as the 2014 Farm Bill did direct that no federal funds were to be used on prosecuting hemp growers who were operating under an approved state license, or processors for that matter, though not every state contemplated processing licenses. But there was a lot of confusion that came out of that. You had that conflict between the Farm Bill, the Controlled Substances Act. It was not clear what you could do with the hemp that was being produced. Where could you ship it? Where could you sell it? What kind of processing could you do with it? Transportation was a big issue. Could it go across state lines, particularly in states that didn't have a state pilot program in place? Sourcing of seeds was a big issue. Where could you get your seeds from? So it was a first step, but it was clearly not enough to establishing a legitimate marketplace for hemp and for CBD in this country. So that takes us to the 2018 Farm Bill. And, probably the most important thing that did is it, for one, it defined hemp in a manner consistent with that prior definition of industrial hemp, but dropped that industrial term. It also amended the CSA to remove hemp from the definition of marijuana, and that was probably the most important thing it did. And yes, that is not a typo. The Controlled Substances Act does spell marijuana that way. It's carry over from an earlier time. It also granted states broad authority to regulate and limit the production and sale of hemp and hemp-derived products. And I think importantly, though still an issue that some states are struggling with, It prohibits states from limiting the transportation or shipment of legally produced hemp and hemp-derived products across their borders, regardless of state law. Now, we'll get into this a little bit later, but there have been some issues with lawfully produced hemp being seized in certain states that don't view things so favorably. So, who's regulating hemp at the federal level? You really have three administrations that are looking at that. You've got the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the Food and Drug Administration, and the Federal Trade Commission. This slide is not going to be entirely accurate because just today, USDA issued its interim final rules on hemp. It's been sitting at the White House for a couple of weeks. It was approved on Friday. They released a draft portion of that for public viewing this afternoon. And it's expected that that's going to hit the Federal Register on Thursday, which will open up the 60-day comment period. But a lot of the deadlines, the timelines that are tied to that passage will take effect as soon as it hits the Federal Register. So a little bit of breaking news on that. I'll admit that there was no time for me to read the whole thing today, but I did pull a little blurb. And specifically, it provides the USDA regulations are going to require that states submit their plans, which must include their licensing requirements, information on the land on which hemp is produced, procedures for testing the THC concentration levels for hemp, procedures for disposing of non-compliant plants, compliance provisions, and procedures for handling violations. I don't think any of that necessarily comes as a surprise. I was talking with somebody before this kicked off who works at a testing facility. One of the things this is going to require is DEA registration of labs that test for THC content. I don't know if that was fully expected and is potentially an additional administrative hurdle. But so now that those are in place, again, there's going to be a comment period for 60 days, but states really have a decision to make over the next 12 months. They can either get their plan submitted to the USDA for approval, or they can continue to operate under basically the provisions of the 2014 Farm Bill until such time as they submit those plans. My expectation would be that some of the states that have been forefront in hemp and CBD are going to be on this pretty quickly. But in any event, there's 12 months to get it done. So FDA and FTC regulation. So FDA has the authority to regulate hemp-derived products through the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. That includes human food, animal food, dietary supplements, drugs. The FTC has authority under the FTC Act to regulate advertising to protect consumers from unfair and deceptive claims. But FDA is probably the biggest arm that we're concerned with when it comes to CBD. The FDA has made three things very, very clear. It's unlawful to market CBD-containing products as treating any human or medical condition. It is unlawful to market CBD-containing products as being intended for human or animal consumption. This is the dietary supplement rule. And it's unlawful to use CBD as an additive to any food or beverage intended for human or animal consumption. And why is this? Well, this really stems a lot from the approval of the trials of two drugs and approval of one, Sativex and Epidiolex. Epidiolex is a drug whose main ingredient is CBD. It was approved in 2018 to treat two pediatric epilepsy syndromes, and the phase 1 trials for that began back in September of 2013. And then you've also got Sativex, who is undergoing trials. It's currently in phase 3, but phase 1 began back in 2011, and that has two ingredients being THC and CBD. Because the FDA has approved CBD as a drug, CBD companies cannot market CBD as treating any medical condition without going through the full FDA drug approval process. When we're talking about dietary supplements, generally speaking, they don't require FDA approval, which is often why you see that disclaimer that this is a dietary supplement. But there's an exception to that, and that's if it contains a new dietary ingredient, which is one that was not marketed in the United States prior to 1994. And it's unlikely that CBD fits there, and FDA has confirmed that, at least that being their position right now. The additional complication is where it's been approved as a drug, it's therefore excluded from the definition of a dietary supplement. And so when you're talking about food additives, which is a different category, for one, you can't add drugs to food. There is an exception for substances added to foods before they were ever studied or approved as drugs, but the FDA has made very clear that in its opinion this does not apply. And again, I think that's because with those drug trials underway for Sativex and the PDLX as early as 2011, 2013, all of which predated the 2014 Farm Bill, which is probably the first time you could really argue that it would have been even legal to produce CBD from the hemp plant. Because all that predates, that exception doesn't apply. So what has FDA and FTC done so far to do this? Well, so far this year, they've issued warning letters, and the slide says 9. I actually looked today, and they had just issued another one, so a 10th warning letter to manufacturers of CBD-containing products. Some of them have been sent by FDA, some by FTC, and some by both organizations. Out of all of these, probably the biggest player I would say to receive a warning letter is Curaleaf. They're a pretty big operator in this field and received a pretty damning letter a couple of months ago. I think it was back in September. And I pulled a few snippets from there, but they FDA took issue with the fact that they were marketing some of their products for treating medical conditions like chronic pain, anxiety, and ADHD. They also took issue with the fact that they were labeling certain products as dietary supplements. And then they went after them before having unapproved new animal drugs. And so these are really the issues that FDA has been focusing on. We'll talk about it in a second. I think moving forward, it's the drug issue and treating medical condition issue that they're going to continue to focus on. But they've not been sitting on their hands. There's not been any enforcement action so far. But they have, they're willing to go after companies that violate what they say. Which leads us to what's the status of the regulations? It's a gray area. I mean, it's the Wild West in this right now. They've yet to issue regulations relating to CBD-containing products. They are basing a lot of their guidance documentation on the FD&C Act and kind of bootstrapping some of that into some of this authority. The prior commissioner for the FDA, Scott Gottlieb, earlier this year estimated a 3 to 5 year timeline to issue final regulations. A public hearing was held back on May 31st, and there was significant desire from the stakeholders there for a regulatory pathway to permit the marketing of CBD-containing products as food additives and dietary supplements. There were also concerns expressed about regulatory oversight, safety standards, consistent terminology, and additional research. FDA has made some public comments that relate to these things. I think it's safe to say you can boil it down to, I mean, they're concerned, I think, about needing more research on the long-term uses of CBD. Particularly when you're talking about treating human conditions, but even for use as a food additive or as a dietary supplement. As Lowell Schiller, who's with the FDA, commented in August at the National Industrial Hemp Council Business Summit, when you're talking about these drugs, these products that are marketed for treating things like cancer, Alzheimer's, opioid use disorder, and pain, FDA says these products are unapproved new drugs and they are illegal. It's paving the way for regulatory clarity. These are some comments made by Mr. Schiller and Amy Abernathy back in July. And, I think coming out of that May 31st public hearing, FDA recognizes the need to have a regulatory pathway sooner than 3 to 5 years for use of CBD as a dietary supplement and food additive. They're still struggling with how to get there, I think. And so these were some other comments that were made in August. So they're acknowledging this need, but they're not reacting fast enough. And in response to that, we're starting to see, federal legislators start to get involved in this. I think one of the biggest actions with this was this letter from our own Representative Comey and Shelley Pingree from Maine, a letter to FDA last month, calling on them to promptly issue guidance announcing a policy of enforcement discretion to eliminate regulatory uncertainty for farmers, retailers, and consumers, And they called on FDA to issue an interim final rule to establish a clear regulatory framework for CBD as a dietary supplement and food additive. Senators Ron Wyden and Jeff Merkley from Oregon also sent letters demanding that FDA take action. Chuck Schumer, just in the past week or two, has issued some pretty strong comments about that. FDA has said over and over, we'll get there, we'll have more guidance by late summer, early fall. Well, we're into November almost, and we still don't have that guidance from FDA. So I think everybody in the room hopes they're getting there, but we're not quite there yet. Maybe the most likely action we'll see, the Senate Appropriations Committee introduced as part of the Agricultural Spending Bill, Senate Bill 2522. Senator McConnell demanded that include language, which he successfully had inserted, that would direct FDA within 90 days to provide the Senate Appropriations Committee with a report regarding its progress toward obtaining and analyzing data for enforcement discretion and evaluation of CBD for use in products, and within 120 days to issue a policy of enforcement discretion with regard to certain products containing CBD to remain in effect until the final rules are issued. That was approved by the Senate Appropriations Committee on September 19, placed on the General Orders calendar, and it's been sitting there ever since, and there's been no more action taken on it. So it doesn't seem all that controversial, but if that does get passed, whenever it gets passed, it at least puts a clock on the FDA to get something out there. So that's kind of where we stand with the status of federal regulation and how we've got there. Let me hand this off to Joe, who's going to talk a little bit about what's happening here in Kentucky.
All right. Well, thank you, Brad, and thank you to the attorneys of Stoll Keenon Ogden for allowing me to be here with you today. I know that Charles and Annie have a lot of input from their parts of the state government. I'm going to talk a little bit about the program we've built here in Kentucky and why we think it made the most sense for the Commonwealth to build the program the way that we did. And I've been with the department for about 3.5 years now. Before that, I was an attorney, an associate with Stoll Keenon Ogden in Louisville. And looking back on that time, I realized that I had the opportunity to work alongside some of the very finest attorneys you could hope to find in Kentucky or anywhere. And the training opportunity that came from that was tremendous for me, and I'm always grateful for it. And I think also it's very logical that this firm would be interested in hemp and expanding its offerings in the hemp space, considering its long association with other signature agricultural industries in Kentucky, not least bourbon and the equine industry. So I'm glad to be with you and look forward to answering any questions you might have at the end. My boss is Commissioner Ryan Quarles. He's been in office almost 4 years now. When he came to the department in early 2016, he inherited a program that was then in its infancy. They had 2 growing seasons under their belt under the previous commissioner, James Comer. The first year was 2014. They grew all of 33 acres across the state. Big jump in 2015 to 922 acres. And it was clear that the program was going to continue to grow by leaps and bounds. But it was also clear that the existing program structure was not going to be adequate to meet that demand for future growth. We had only a handful of employees working in the hemp space. There were no general fund appropriation dollars, so the time and trouble we were spending on hemp was coming at the expense of other programs. And then most problematic was the fact that there was very little guidance from Washington about what the rules of the road were. As Brad mentioned earlier, it's true that the 2014 Farm Bill did create this limited breathing space for agricultural pilot programs, but if you printed out the section of the Farm Bill that explained what that meant, you could have printed it on the front and back of a single page of paper. Not much guidance at all, and considering that all cannabis remained unlawful under the Controlled Substances Act, most states and most industry players were very reluctant to get involved with this, at least for the time being. Kentucky was different. Kentucky was different, I think, in part because of the political leadership at that time, and they were responding in turn to the fact that Kentucky's agricultural community was hungrier for new opportunities than was the case in other states. Burley tobacco was, beginning and well into its rapid decline, and there was a need for small family farms to find some new crop to work with to try to support the family farm. So my boss, Commissioner Quarles, when he inherited this, He said, we don't know how long this research pilot program phase is going to last. As we came to find out, it lasted exactly 5 years. But however long it does last, 2 years or 20 years, I want to build the best program in the country so that investors and farmers who are interested in experimenting with industrial hemp will look at the program we've built here in Kentucky, say that's the program that's easiest to understand, it's the most rational, it has the least anxiety-causing ambiguity to it. So I'm going to come and invest my dollars here in Kentucky. In short, his goal was to build Kentucky as the epicenter for industrial hemp in the United States, and I believe that we're well on our way to making that a reality. Here's some dollar figures and numbers reported by program participants. This year we had about 60,000 acres in all approved for production. I think about 26,000 is the current figure. We've seen a 5-fold increase in the number of our growers. We now have close to 200 processors in the state. And then the dollars are what any of us from an economic development perspective ought to be interested in. We saw more than a doubling of the amount that was paid to growers. I'm sure that in 2019 that number will show a doubling or a tripling again. We now have at least 600 jobs that are after the farm gate, so these are non-farm jobs. Gross product sales of about $55 million last year. I know for sure it'll be over $100 million this year, and we expect that this growth will continue at a rate of doubling or tripling for the next couple of years. So there is a lot of money pouring into the Commonwealth right now. Some of it's from Kentucky, and some of it's from outside. And we see that as a testament to the fact that Kentucky really does have the best program in the country, and these dollar figures prove it. This map will give you a sense for the reach of how far across the Commonwealth. You see that we've got hemp being grown in these counties. The red dots represent processors. We're very proud of the bank of processors that we've built in this state. In most states, there are few to none. We have more than 200, which means that for the farmers who choose to grow hemp in Kentucky, they actually have a menu of options for where they can sell their hemp. And they tend to be concentrated along the interstate highway system, which makes sense from a commerce perspective. This is the most important slide I share with every audience. We probably ought to have it appear 5 times in every presentation, because with the novelty of this crop, with the uncertainty, with the price volatility that is inherent in a new crop, there's no guarantee that you're going to make money. And we tell farmers over and over, do not put more money into this than you can afford to lose. Most of them listen, and some of them don't. But I thought I would include that for you as well. For those who may not have much of a background with hemp, it's grown for 3 different purposes, 3 different genetic profiles. It's very rare that a single plant or a single variety will be used to grow for more than one of these purposes. Typically, you have a farmer who's focusing on one in particular. It is an oilseed crop, so it can be grown for grain, which can be crushed, just like you would with soybeans and other oilseeds. The fiber varieties tend to produce plants that are long and thick in the stem. It involves a process called retting, where you leave it in the fields after it's been harvested in order to allow the fiber to start to come apart. And then the last one, and the one that has drawn the most interest, has been with your floral extracts, or CBD. Over 90% of the acreage grown in Kentucky this year was for CBD, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. Again, these are the 3 main applications that you might see as a finished product. Your grain products are used in cosmetics and in food products. Fiber is used in things like animal bedding and composite materials. And then your hemp extracts are the products that you see increasingly in large retailers, but also in small shops and even in gas stations. CBD production has been the big surprise over the last 6 years. I think it's fair to say that when the Congress considered the 2014 Farm Bill and was toying with the idea of creating this limited opportunity for experimentation, they were most likely thinking in terms of the grain and fiber. Those were the parts of the plant that were well known to our ancestors who grew hemp here back in the 19th century and early part of the 20th. CBD has come on as something of a surprise, and in part it's because of the prices that farmers have been able to take advantage of. Unlike the other areas, it's not well suited at this point to mechanized farming, which means it's very labor intensive. It takes a lot of labor to tend for a CBD field. And in many ways, it resembles, in terms of production models and labor inputs, what many farm families remember from burley tobacco. It takes a lot of work to farm just a few acres. But the flip side of that same coin is that you can make a decent amount of money just on 5 or 10 acres of CBD production, which is very exciting for a farm state like Kentucky, where most farms are still operated by a single family, and they have not seen the consolidation that you've seen in states to the north and west of us, where farming is managed by much larger corporate entities. Kentucky's existing legal framework was established by the General Assembly back in 2017. The key part that I think the most important thing the legislature did, as compared to its counterparts in other states, is that they seriously thought about what happens after you harvest the hemp out of the fields. In most states that devised agricultural pilot programs, they were just focused on who can farm and under what circumstances. They did not think very hard about what happens to the crop after it comes out of the field. Who can handle it? Is everything that comes out of the field street legal, so to speak? Can anyone handle floral material or leaf material or the living seeds or viable plants? Kentucky's lawmakers, to their credit, actually drew a line, and they said that even after it comes out of the field, these 4 underlying categories, your living plants, your viable seeds, your leaf material, and your floral material, they can only be in the possession of someone who holds a license as a processor from the Department of Agriculture. And as a result, we also issue licenses not just to the growers, but to the processors. It seems like years ago now, but back in 2016, there were many processors who were concerned that we wouldn't be able to issue them a license, that we would license only the growers, and that the processors would then feel like they were exposed to an unfriendly visit from a law enforcement representative. They wanted to have licenses issued by the Department of Agriculture because financial institutions wanted to have some paper, some evidence that what they were doing was lawful and not simply illegal marijuana production. So Kentucky, I think, by building out a processor licensing structure, which most states did not, made this a more attractive environment for credible, legitimate business people who wanted to have some security that they would not receive that unfriendly visit from a law enforcement agency. And I think that's the single most important thing that the legislature did when they enacted our law back in 2017. The flip side to that same coin is that they made some important modifications to the Kentucky Controlled Substances Act. Everyone knows about the Federal Controlled Substances Act. We also have one here in Kentucky. And the legislature has made 6 important carve-outs from the definition of what is marijuana. And I'm not going to read them to you, but the gist of it is that if you hold a license from the Department of Agriculture as a grower or as a processor, you can be in possession of the entire part of the living plant, including its floral material and leaf material. Non-licensees fit into the second subsection, B, in the sense that they can possess any parts of the plant other than floral material, leaf material, living plants, and viable seeds. And then there's 4 additional carve-outs for CBD products in particular. And having that legal certainty at the state level, at least, has been really important to entrepreneurs who are thinking about coming to Kentucky, interested in working with CBD, and not at all interested in being on the wrong side of the law. So even under the new 2019 regulations, which were issued just this morning by the USDA, it remains the case that the only legal hemp production in Kentucky is as a licensee of the department. Our program for years now has required an annual application and an annual criminal background check. We have 3 kinds of licenses. We issue a license to the grower and to the processor. Those licenses mean different things. And it is very possible for an individual to apply for and hold both types of license. Then we also have a 3rd one for the university researchers who are interested in experimenting with the crop in all sorts of different ways. This is the same slide I talked about earlier. If I could, it would be every other slide because some people just really need repetition to get the message. And I'm going to pause there and turn it over, Brad, to Charles or Annie to speak as well.
Can everybody hear me? I'm not a podium speaker, so I'm going to walk around because I like to mess with the cameraman. And I also want to see what you're Googling while I'm walking around. So I won't go very far, so I'll stay in this tight area. But I do want to start out by thanking Stoll Keenon Ogden for having this event, for one thing, so we can have a conversation about this, but for including me. I also want to compliment them on preparing this several months ago and making it perfectly aligned when the USDA is going to release the regulation. So whoever did that, they're amazing. When I saw that release this morning, I got excited thinking that, wow, I could print this out and be more prepared for this conversation than I was beforehand. But then I got on there and Googled it, PDF'd it, it's 161 pages. I forgot it was coming from a federal agency. So I did not read it, but it is out there. Joe talked about his boss, Commissioner Quarles. My boss is in the audience today, so I do want to recognize her, Gail Russell, who's the Secretary for the Public Protection Cabinet. So if you don't see me anymore after tomorrow, you know that this was a complete flop and I'm going away. So if I quote, I like to do quotes. I either do it at the beginning or end of a presentation. So if I quote Admiral Stockdale, is anybody going to get that reference? Do you know who that was? Who was that? Ross Perot's Vice President Ross Perot. And I love one of his quotes. Who am I and what am I doing here? So really, if someone could help me out with that, I'd like to know. No, who am I? So I regulate all state-chartered financial institutions that offer services in Kentucky. That ranges from banks, credit unions, non-depository lenders, money transmitters, and anybody dealing with the securities business. So basically, we regulate banks and credit unions. And one of the reasons I got into this, and one of the reasons I think this is an important topic, we've heard about the potential economic impact on this. When the 2014 Farm Bill came out, actually at the beginning of 2015, I actually met with some growers, and they were telling me about the potential that's associated with it, and it was going to be a good replacement crop for them for tobacco, and what they could potentially get off it, how they could grow with it. But then, in addition to that conversation, I also had some banks starting to call me and say, hey, we've got some long-time customers that have been with this institution for a long period of time. They're wanting to get into hemp. They think it's a new potential product for them, and we're just concerned about offering service to them, so we've actually asked them to leave the night. And I'm sitting there thinking, that is a bad regulatory environment when we have this potential economic opportunity in the state, and the financing piece of it could be a problem. So one of the things I did is I went into learning mode, and that's one of the things I do when something new comes up. If there's additional risks or if there's a new opportunity, I go into learning mode. So I've been going to conferences as much as I possibly can. Matter of fact, at one conference I was at, I actually had the CFO of Gincana on the panel with me. So one of the things I said is, hey, your facility is literally 3 miles from my house. I want to come by and visit it. So actually, he said, yeah, sure, come on, we'll do it next week on this day, come by, and I'll give you a tour of the facility. And it's just interesting things just to learn how it's produced, how it's manufactured, what the production process is. One of the interesting things I asked him as we're going through this, I said, all these techniques, where in the world did you pick this up from? Because actually, a lot of it mirrors what we do with marijuana, or how marijuana is produced. But one of the interesting things I got from this is he took me into one facility where they bring the hemp in, it goes through a shredding process, then they put it on these literally trays that look like bread trays. So I walked up to it and I thought it was dirt. So what are you doing with all this dirt here? And he goes, that's actually hemp, we're drying it. And I actually touched it and I was like, oh my gosh, I probably just messed up their whole crop. So they just touched the hemp. But then they take this and they run it through this compressor and press it to get the oil out of it. So I was really just fascinated with that process. But then we look at the numbers and the growth opportunity that's here, and I wanted banks to feel comfortable that as long as they've gone through the process that our agriculture department has set up, the banks should feel comfortable offering financial services to them. So actually in 2016, the department issued the guidance in Kentucky that says, hey, if you're a financial institution and you're offering financial services to someone that's involved in the hemp industry, either growing, producing, or whatever, don't feel through BSA or anti-money laundering you have to treat them as a high-risk customer. Now, there may be other characteristics associated with their business that make them that need to be considered high-risk customers, but simply because they're involved in the hemp program, as long as you do your due diligence, check with the Kentucky Department of Agriculture, they're under the MOU program, anything like that, you can do business with them, and I want to give them some assurance on that. When the 2018 Farm Bill came out, we issued additional guidance, again, reminding the financial institutions that they can offer this, that they can do this. And one of the things that really frustrated me with this process, or that process we're doing that guidance, is I actually had conversations with every single federal banking regulator. Talked to the FDIC, the OCC, the Federal Reserve, said, hey, this is a big issue, not only particularly for Kentucky, but the country. And financial institutions need guidance on this. They need to know where you're going to stand on this, because you don't want the unfriendly visit from the regulator. I love that term. I'm going to use it now to talk about our examinations. That's going to be unfriendly visits from the law enforcement. But each one of them said, no, it's just not big enough an issue for us right now. So we're not going to be involved with this. One regulatory agency at the federal level has issued guidance that come out in August, I believe it's August 16th of this year, and that was the NCUA. They didn't take as strong a stand as we did, but at least they come out with some kind of guidance. But that's the only federal banking regulatory agency that has issued any kind of guidance relative to hemp. And again, they were focused on hemp. They didn't focus on marijuana or anything like that. But one of the things that I do like, two things in particular, is I've had some states that are around us where their state agriculture departments are now getting into this and looking into this and kind of promoting it. And they've contacted me and said, hey, you're the first one in the country that did anything. Can we have your guidance? Can we look at it? Can we? Do you mind if we even mirror it? And I was like, no. If you want to, take it verbatim for what it says and just put your name on it. I don't care. Another thing I recently found out too that I'm very proud of as well is even though the federal agencies have not taken a stance on this, they have not issued anything publicly. If they're asked during an examination of a Kentucky chartered financial institution about hemp and what their position is on it, what I've been told informally by all the regulatory agencies is that they will give them my guidance, our guidance that come out of the department, and say, as long as you're a Kentucky Department of Financial Institutions, this is what we're going to look at for leadership on this. So they're looking for the department for leadership on that issue relative to Kentucky. Now, one of the things that's kind of confusing about this is that there's a lot of different laws on this, and I'll give you an example of how it can just be really odd in some states. I was talking to the Ohio commissioner not too long ago, and in 2008, I think it's the beginning of 2019, their legislature passed medical marijuana. So you can have medical marijuana in Ohio. What do you think they forgot to include in that bill? Hemp. So hemp remained illegal in Ohio. They're supposed to take that up with this legislative session, but it is just really odd. And Joe mentioned transportation and the difficulties of transportation. I was actually talking to a couple other commissioners, one in particular in South Dakota, and they have actually had an issue when hemp was being transported through their state. The state police stopped it, said we don't know if this is hemp or marijuana. They impounded it for a while, and actually ended up destroying the crop because that impounded so long until they could test it to determine that it was hemp and not marijuana. So there are a lot of issues associated with this, but I at least wanted our financial institutions in Kentucky to know that, hey, when we come in, you have some clarity on how the department's going to look at this, how it's going to be treated, and how we're going to deal with this. And one thing I've been very pleased with is we've had several institutions tell me that they are now offering financial services to hemp growers, hemp producers. One of the things that they're having the biggest problem with right now from a financial perspective is credit cards. Visa, MasterCard have said they will not authorize credit cards to be issued to anybody in the hemp industry. And the reason for that is their concern is that marijuana proceeds will be in with that or mixed in with it, and some marijuana proceeds may flow through that system as well. So that's one of the biggest impediments right now, but I am very pleased to report that we have many institutions, one in particular down in Murray, Kentucky, CFSB, that's actually marketing themselves as they want to be the hemp bank for the U.S. They're very active in the market. They do financing for several farmers. In addition to that, one of the things that, in addition to using the stalks for fiber, the floral piece of it and the seed piece of it, in Murray, Kentucky, there's actually a hemp wood manufacturer that is trying to develop a process in the system to take the hemp plant, the fiber plant, and make flooring out of it, and make hemp wood out of it. I actually got to go tour that, and I think that's going to be an amazing process as well once they get it finalized and finished, but they're still going through the process of how do we do this, what's the inputs, how do we need to treat this, what the proprietary process needs to go through to make hemp. Hemp wood, it's really neat and unusual, and that's the first facility of its kind, I think, in the world that's being done in Murray, Kentucky. In addition, I'm going to conclude with this. Senator McConnell has been very supportive of the hemp industry, not only Kentucky, but throughout the United States. And he's also been very supportive of the federal regulatory agencies issuing some kind of guidance to the industry on how this will be treated. So in April 2nd, 2019 of this year, he actually sent a letter to the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, the Federal Reserve System, as well as the Farm Credit Administration, and he made a simple request. He just basically requested that the regulatory bodies provide guidance to institutions under their jurisdiction to ease any concern banks or other financial institutions may have with providing services to hemp businesses. I wish that they would take him up on this, because that is one of the things that financial institutions are concerned about is, okay, we have clarity from Kentucky and how Kentucky Department of Financial Institutions will look at this, but we don't know, because we don't have anything in writing from the federal agencies of how they're going to look at when they come in, and if we're a state surrounding us as well. The other states have not issued guidance like we have. So again, they're looking to the federal agencies for guidance on this as well. So I do hope at some point the federal agencies do pick up on this letter, do pick up on the recommendation, and issue some guidance relative to this, because I do think it is a potential, very high potential of economic opportunities for farmers in Kentucky, producers, manufacturers, wholesalers, and it's a wide variety of the use of this product, which I think Annie's going to get into next. So I'm going to turn it over to her.
You know, I'm not much of a walker, so you don't have to worry if you're Googling something or on an email. No worries, I got you. I'll stay over here. But hello, everybody. I'm Annie Franklin. I'm a project manager with the Kentucky Cabinet for Economic Development. And I'd first like to thank Stoll Keenon Ogden for having me today. I was sharing earlier that this is extremely nice to have an event like this, to have everybody join together at the state level, to have our firms involved here in Kentucky, just because at one point or another we were all operating individually. And I can't tell you how many times my phone was ringing and I got questions about everything under the sun, and my response was, I'll get back to you, I'll find the right person, we'll figure it out. So it's nice to have everybody on the same team so we can connect and make sure that we're all sharing the same information and we're moving forward and on the same page. But my focus is particularly attracting new business into the state of Kentucky. I focus on food and beverage projects. I focus on consumer products and agribusiness projects, which basically has just been hemp in the last year, which has been exciting. It's been an exciting time in Kentucky because where this has been such an emerging industry, as you know, Kentucky has been on the top of the country's lists in something, so we're happily marketing that and excited to share that with other states from across the country. And I don't think that we're going to stop now. I think that we've got much room to grow and we're learning so much as we go. I was looking at the numbers before I got here as far as incentives and what we have done in our cabinet and work with other groups. And I think we're around almost $94 million in the Biden administration of new capital invested for hemp companies. And that's around 970 jobs created. So it's had a significant impact on the economic development of our state. And I don't anticipate that this industry is going to be slowing down at all. A little bit of background of myself. So I am not a farmer or anything of that nature. I work typically on the business side. I have a background in sales and marketing. And I lean strongly on the Kentucky Department of Agriculture for a lot of my farming questions. I can remember my first time I went out to a farm just recently and I came in heels and a suit And the farmer was like, I hope you know that you're going to probably get a little dirty walking out here. So it's been an exciting ride learning a little bit more about this plant and really how it is multifaceted. You can create a number of products from this plant alone. So not just CBD. Historically, we're known for fiber. And I think we'll see more of that in the future, where we've had such an increase of the CBD companies and CBD processors. I truly believe that we'll see fiber companies really, really skyrocket through and create a number of products, whether it be in the textiles industry, whether it be in building materials, as Charles mentioned, hemp wood in Western Kentucky. It's incredible what they're doing. Hardwood floors made of hemp. I mean, this plant, I think we're just scratching the surface truly about what it can do, what we can do with it, what we can actually replace a lot of the products that we're using and resourcing to make various other products, what we can use for hemp. So I'm excited about the growth. I don't have much more information other than that. I'm excited to answer any questions. Like I said earlier, this is nice to have this forum. We need more forums like this so we can share the information that we've had thus far and we're learning all together. I feel like there's new information evolving every day. And this morning when I was on the road, USDA released those regulations, so I wasn't going to be listening to that in the car trying to read that. But I figured we'd talk about it a little bit today. So this is really nice and opportune that we can all get together and discuss this wonderful industry.
Thanks, everybody. Andy, we'll just keep it with you for the moment. Joe and you both have talked a little bit about the products that could be made from this plant. Where do you see the biggest economic development opportunities?
Where I discussed a little bit where this plant is extremely multifaceted, I have seen companies range from just CBD processing to taking the waste from whether it be fiber processing to CBD processing and creating other materials like packaging materials or paper products. I've seen a company, they want to utilize molded plates and bowls and forks and spoons and things of that nature. So I think the sky is the limit. If you look at the textiles industry, I mean, you really can use hemp everywhere in that regard. I actually own a denim jacket that's made of hemp, 35% hemp, and it's considered to be more durable than cotton. So it's just interesting what you can do with hemp and how we can utilize it. I know that 90% of the crops that were committed this past year were for CBD process or for CBD. But I think that there's going to be a massive growth in the years to come in the fiber space. I really see a lot of opportunity. I mean, I also see a lot of opportunity with grain and seed. It's one of those things where we need food, we need clothes, we need things to sit on, chairs, tables, that sort of thing. So fiber and seed kind of go hand in hand. And if you think about seed actually has an extremely high, they're extremely high in protein. Much higher than chia seeds or flax seeds or anything like that. They're high in omega-6 and high in omega-3. So it's one of those things where I think the necessities will see an extreme growth in those areas. But, not to put down CBD at all, because I think, again, we're just scratching the surface on that. There's so much research to be done. Who knows what we'll find out, and the properties that will find out, the healing properties that I think that we can find out that CBD will help with, and sky's the limit. But I think we've got years to come and to be continued to see what the hemp plant has in store.
So I'll throw this out to any of our panelists who want to take it, but we talked a little bit before about the uncertainty at the federal level, the waiting game that's been going on with the FDA. We've got some hints of what they may do, what they may not do, but here in Kentucky, what kind of due diligence is being done at the state level with regards to companies that are making CBD products in Kentucky, and whether that's potentially running afoul of these dietary supplement restrictions or food additives? Is there anything being done at the state level to address that?
Are you speaking primarily in terms of like product safety for consumption purposes?
Sure.
Yes, Brad, there is an agency that is tasked with that. It's the food safety branch within the Cabinet for Health and Family Services. And by law, they have the same or parallel jurisdiction to that of the FDA. Their staffing level is not what it ought to be historically. And so their ability to keep up with all this has been limited by staffing shortages. And my perception is that they are largely waiting for the FDA to decide what FDA's approach is going to be, and then use the limited resources that they do to have a parallel enforcement structure. But up until today, at least, there has not been much product safety work done by any agency in Frankfurt. And there have been some criticisms of the state government for that. I think it's unfair because the policy and the science is evolving so rapidly that it makes sense for FDA to assume that lead role.
Thank you, Joe. Charles, Danny, any comments on that?
As far as product regulation, I mean, obviously, economic development wouldn't have a hand in that. But as far as kind of qualifying what kind of companies that we have in this, well, that apply for incentives, if you will, there's a lot of companies that jump the gun that we didn't know about, and this is where the partnership between our team and Kentucky Department of Agriculture comes into play. Learning where these companies are coming from, if they even have a background in agriculture, what's been their previous history, what other companies have they worked with. You know, we are learning how to qualify these leads more and more as we go. For economic development purposes and incentives, we treat this as any startup that we encounter. We do our due diligence. We have a fantastic research team that really goes on and tries to figure out where did this CEO come from, what was his background, what was his history with this previous company, is there anything that we should know? We always connect with KDA to see if they have any encounters with this company. For our incentives, we do require a background check, and we do check your financials. So we take the necessary steps to make sure that if you're going to build a company here in Kentucky and bring everything that you foresee for your future here in the state, that we want it to be a thriving and a successful company. So we take the necessary steps to make sure that that happens.
Charles, with regard to offering financial services to hemp-related businesses, what are some of the primary concerns you see? And you know, I'm interested if some of these concerns apply equally when we're talking about, you know, growers, harvesters, transporters, processors, sellers. There's a lot of different businesses that participate in this industry. What are the primary concerns?
So I'll break that down into looking at each group that you just mentioned. Obviously, the farmer. From a lending perspective, if the bank's getting in business, not getting in business, but offering financial services to the farmer, up until this point, crop insurance has not been available for hemp. So if a natural disaster occurs, if something else occurs, there's no crop insurance for it. Fortunately, most banks tell me that the farmers that are involved and engaged in this, it's not a significant portion of their total operations. So I love Joe's comment of, don't get involved in what you're not willing or able to lose. And I think farmers have, at least up to this point, have kind of stayed by that and not dedicated all their farmland to this. But no crop insurance is one thing with it. Another thing that I've heard could be an issue with this as well is right now under the MOU program, there should be basically a forward contract that once the growing season is ended and it's harvested, someone is going to buy the crop for whatever purposes it was designated beforehand. Not universally, but I've heard some of those contracts have not been consummated because the seller ended up having cash flow difficulties. So the farmer grew the crop, harvested it, took it to them, and they got ready to transport it, and the seller had to inform them, we don't have the ability to purchase the crop at this time. So then that, again, would have an impact on the farmer. Another issue could be is if the field tests hot. To be hemp, it has to have THC of 0.3% or less. In some instances, they can go out to do the test on the crop, and it turned out to be hot above that.
For those of us who are interested in Kentucky history and who hail from the eastern part of the state, like you do, Brad, it's interesting that hemp could be the future of plant agriculture in eastern Kentucky. If you look at the USDA stats from 25 years ago and looked at what in each county by county, what was going on in agriculture in those parts of the state, family farms were dependent on two things in eastern Kentucky: beef cattle and burley tobacco. And in fact, early tobacco constituted over 90% of the total plant agriculture output for most of eastern Kentucky for most of the 20th century. And the reason that it was viable is that given the hilly terrain there, you're never going to have vast expanses of hundreds of acres like you might see in western Kentucky, or dozens of acres like you might see in central Kentucky. Early tobacco worked for that small model of 5 or 10 acres on a family farm. Hemp can work in that same sort of limited acreage environment. And so I recently attended a conference of the Appalachian Regional Commission, which has a purview over Kentucky and about 12 other states that touch on Appalachia. And there's a lot of excitement about hemp there because in those mountainous parts of Appalachia, for the first time since burley tobacco went away, which is 15, 20 years ago, there's a newcomer, a new plant that can make plant production in small acreages in the mountains viable. And so I think that next year this map will show a lot more green in the eastern part of the state, which is to say that plant agriculture is going to be viable again for the first time east of I-75, I-75, thanks to the hemp plant.
Let's keep it with you for a minute, Joe. Obviously, the breaking news in the world today is the USDA interim rules finally coming down. Where is Kentucky right now with regards to the plan that will be submitted to USDA?
We submitted the plan the first day that you could, which was moments after President Trump signed the 2018 Farm Bill into law on December 20th of last year. USDA quickly called us and said, hey, we're not ready for this right now. And then the federal government shut down for 2 months last winter, and that didn't help things either. So they basically called a timeout on us and the other 5 or 6 states that submitted plans early because they needed to take these summer and fall months to get their own house in order, think about the criteria that they would use to evaluate a state plan, like the one we already submitted, and then apply it to documents that come out. I've only read today's guidance once, and I'll need to do it a few more times, but it seems to me that it's not going to be a tremendous lift for us to bring our existing hemp program into compliance with the federal structure. I think a lot of states are going to have to basically scrap their existing programs and rebuild it from scratch, which is going to cause a lot of disruption to those market players that have chosen to relocate to those states. I think that based on my initial review, these new regulations are going to be not a big problem for us in Kentucky, which will make it all the easier for us to maintain the running lead that we have over the other states already.
Yeah, I'll throw this out to everybody on the panel, but when we talk about cultivation, are we tending to see established farmers moving into hemp from other crops, or are we tending to see people try to take their sort of first run at farming so they can get involved in this kind of exploding industry?
Well, from what I've seen, it's just been a big variety. I feel like the farmers that I've encountered, they are either brand new farmers who were previously dentists, doctors, you name it, have had another profession and wanted to get into this so they could do dual growing and processing. And then you run into tobacco farmers who find this to be very similar to a crop that they either are currently still growing or not growing any longer. So I have seen a good mix of the two, but it's always fun running into the new farmers who've had various previous professions.
When I go to conferences and meet with bankers outside of an examination process, one of the questions I always try to ask them is, are you involved and engaged in the hemp business or financing hemp industry? It was amazing to me that in 14, 15, and 16, typically the answer I got was no. That has been changing recently. So a lot of the bankers that I'm talking to now said, yeah, we have a couple farmers that are involved in this. We're doing some financing with processing. And for the most part, and again, this is just what the bankers are telling me, that their customers that they're involved and engaged with are not new farmers, but existing farmers that have pretty substantial operations, and they're just dedicating a small portion of their operations to this to kind of dip their toe in the water. I will tell you about a conversation I had with the farmer when I took a tour in Western Kentucky about a month ago. I was talking to him about why did you get into this? Why are you into this? And he had 100 acres. The field we were at was 25 acres, but he had 100 acres in total, and he and his brother farmed 900. So this was basically a tenth of their production. He said, well, look at the field behind you, and it was a CBD oil field. That's what they were trying to get out of it. He said, I got 25 acres here. My expectation, the contract I've signed to sell this, I'm going to get $9,000 an acre for this crop that you're seeing. He said, my all-in cost, that includes the seed, the farm workers, harvesting, transportation, everything's going to be $3,000. He said, so my expectation is to net $6,000 off this. Now, when I'm telling you this is not norm. He had a very high-quality crop, and he spent a lot of money on seeds to make sure he could get at what he wanted. And he said this is probably one of the highest yield crops he's ever had. And he's been doing this for a couple of years. But he said, my other fields are dominated with soybean and corn. He said there's absolutely nothing else that I could do for $6,000 net per acre. So that's where the biggest draw is to him. Now, on the fiber piece, I can tell you that they're not going to get that much per acre. It grows quicker. There's not that much high demand for it to yield net 6,000 an acre. But at least on this piece where he's producing CBD oil, he's already had it sold. His expectations were to net about 6,000 an acre.
I've got one final question for each of you, and then we've got a couple of questions from the audience, so we'll move into those. But for new entrants into this market, be it cultivation, be it processing, be it a CBD producer, what do each of you all see as the biggest hurdles to that right now?
This is probably more in Charles's purview, but the biggest problem I see is access to capital issues, finding a bank that's willing to lend, especially if you're not already involved in production agriculture, because most lenders will lend against collateral that's other than hemp, the value of your farmland or the value of your other crops. If you're a newcomer, you don't have those things to use to put up as collateral. So for me, and what I hear in talking to farmers, it's largely capital access as the biggest hitch. I'd be curious to know, Charles, if you're hearing the same thing.
Sorry, I've been turning this on and off. Yeah, I'll accept that. I think that is one of the biggest risks that we have right now is the access to capital. But I think one of the biggest impediments, and this is coming from someone that was a federal government employee for 18 years. To be honest with you, I think one of the biggest impediments is the federal government. Look how long it took. The day after the 2018 Farm Bill was signed, we're giving our guidance to them, and they're saying, we're not ready for it yet. Don't send it to us. The FDA coming out and saying, we're going to take 3 to 5 years to issue some guidance on this. That's just absolutely ridiculous. This has been removed from the controlled substance list. There needs to be some guidance, and I'm even throwing all the federal banking regulators in this as well. I really do think that the federal government is imperative to this. When this is a viable product, it's actually been grown for hundreds of years, and it's still grown in other countries and used commercially. And yet we're just now letting this come back in the U.S., and we can't get some clarity around this is a product that has multiple uses. It can be grown for 3 different things, and all 3 of those things has a significant commercial use. And we can't get the federal government on board to pass some at least common sense guidelines quickly so we can move forward with this. And even from a banking perspective, and again, the access to capital piece, taking a stand, saying, hey, this has been removed from the controlled substance list, so when we come in and do examinations, we're not going to automatically treat this as a high-risk customer if you're financing them. Instead, we're going to look at it, look at the customer, look how you're funding this, or looking what services you offer to them, and does it make sense, and are you complying with whatever the 2014 or 2018 Farm Bills had in them?
On the processing side, I'm going to have to agree with Joe and just say access to capital, because largely processors, they are getting most of their capital from private investors. Larger banks just aren't ready to bite the bullet and help and loan money to these processors. So they're either finding private investment, or local banks are kind of coming together and offering a hand, saying we can help if you locate to this area. So when I meet with communities to talk about what does your future look like in this county, what industry do you typically, or what industry would you like to see here? I'm hearing more often than not, they would like to see hemp processors. And the second thing that I say to these communities are, what's the atmosphere here like with your banking industry? Are they going to be open to assist and help these companies? Are you going to be there to, help them along the way? So I think that's the issue at hand, and so many folks are saying, well, it'll be a year or 2 years or so before we see everything clear out. And as with every new industry, we've got to work the kinks out. But I think from the local bank perspective, we're seeing a little bit more progress than at the larger scale. But definitely accessing capital is probably the largest hurdle for this industry right now.
All right, thank you all. We'll move on to some of the audience questions. There's some good ones here. The first one, and Charles, I'm pretty sure this one is probably directed at you, but banks sometimes take company stock as part of its collateral package. Are there any issues related to that licensure and a stock foreclosure?
I'm trying to think of what publicly traded company would be out there that would focus solely on hemp. But I think the biggest thing is, again, for the bank to perform their due diligence, who are they lending to and what's their business involved with? One of the biggest challenges right now is, like I talked about before, a lot of the processing techniques come from the marijuana side. So a lot of the companies that are in the hemp production also have presences, either subsidiaries or other companies in marijuana. So that's one of the biggest things you have to know who you're dealing with as a banking perspective, and who are you lending to, what's the money being used for, and at least in Kentucky and at the federal level, marijuana is not a legal product right now in Kentucky at the federal level. So that would be the biggest thing I'd have a bank caution about, is if you are going to take stock as collateral, whether it be a publicly or privately held company, what does that company do, and are you comfortable if you have to go in and take that back, what are you going to be able to do with it?
Joe, do you anticipate there ever being a cap put on the number of processor licenses available in the state?
No, I don't think so. We want as many processors in this state as possible, because we need to build up the critical mass of infrastructure so that the acreage can take off. One thing that we've capitalized on over the last 3 years is that we have more processors than any other state by a lot. And those range from a mom and pop operation where someone's working in their barn that's been converted into a cleaner sanitary space, to massive operations with hundreds of $1 million of capital investment. We built a program that doesn't prefer one over the other. We want them all to come and flourish here, but I can't imagine why we would want to put a cap on the number of processors, especially given the need that will be the demand for those services that the farmers are going to be expressing in the coming years.
This is a question I think is probably good for Joe and Annie to give some comments on, but are we making any efforts in this state to highlight the quality of the product that's grown here versus the hemp that's grown in other states?
Well, I just like to highlight the fact that we have more processors than the other states. But as far as the product, again, economic development, we're not regulating, so we're just assisting with the companies as much as we can. We want to see your company grow. We want to see it flourish. We also want to see your company stay compliant. But as far as regulating or understanding the type of product that you are producing, I don't think it's necessarily something that our cabinet would have much of an opinion on, other than, keep expanding, keep investing dollars into the state, and keep creating new jobs here in Kentucky.
Do you mind if I add something to that?
Please.
It's not necessarily speaking to the quality, but when I went down and visited the hemp wood manufacturer, one of the things I thought was interesting, I asked him, how in the world did you choose Murray State? Because he's not from here. He's not from Kentucky. I said, how did you choose Murray? I gave away part of the answer. How did you choose Murray as the place you're going to locate for this? And he said there was 3 things that went into this. Number one, when I knew I wanted to do this, I wanted to find the state that was most receptive to what I was wanting to do, that was conducive to growing hemp and would give me some access to the product. He said Kentucky was by far the state that was more conducive to growing hemp and promoting hemp and wanting hemp to be a successful product. Second thing is, he said I wanted a location that had multiple farmers that I could choose from and that I could buy product from. As you saw on the map of Western Kentucky, there's a lot of farmers in that area that grow hemp. Third thing was the connection to Murray State. And I was thinking of it, okay, he's just wanting to contact with the engineers, which he did. He had contacted with the engineer department. They run some tests for him and some work on them. But also, what I thought was interesting, he said, I also connected into their marketing program. He said, because one day I want this to be a massive product that's sold not only throughout the U.S., but also throughout the world. And I want to start marketing programs on it right now. So so again, those three factors built into it. What state promoted this and was trying to push this as a product? Number two, he had access to farmers. And number three, he had access to a university that would help him with the engineering aspects of it, but also to the marketing.
All right, thank you. Question, Charles, you answered this maybe a little bit, but if anybody else has input. The question is which publicly traded companies, if any, are market leaders in terms of capitalizing on hemp production or processing for profitability purposes?
I think Annie caps this right. A lot of the big banks are not even wanting to go anywhere near either hemp or marijuana. Some of them have actually taken positions saying we will not do this. So right now for the big projects, unfortunately it's been private equity. So private equities for the larger projects have been doing the funding piece of it. Matter of fact, the CFO that I've talked to, he actually came from New Jersey. And I was asking him, how in the world did you get from New Jersey down here? And he said, well, one of the reasons they brought me in as CFO was he was a broker and he had access to capital markets. So he had access to private equity firms and things like that. That's why they brought him down here to fund that. Other than that, though, it's usually the smaller operations that's going through the local bank. And like I said, CFSB in Murray is really promoting itself as they want to be the hemp bank of the U.S.
And, I believe that Nestle has a division or subsidiary whose focus is on CBD-related products. So there is at least a large publicly traded company that's involved in this.
Another company that's really full bore into both marijuana and hemp is Scott's. A lot of people don't think about that, but their fertilizer, they're really pushing their fertilizer products, especially to the in-house greenhouses and things like that. And a lot of their business right now is dominated by hemp and marijuana production.
Joe, any current plans to alter the regulations to increase allowable THC levels in hemp floral material to mimic neighboring state competitors like Tennessee?
Well, these new federal regulations just came out today, so I don't want to comment too much on what they mean or what changes we might make. We are mindful of the fact that the 0.3 limit is established by Congress, not by the state of Kentucky. And we take seriously our obligation to police that line wherever it's drawn. I know there are some who would like to see that number increased to 0.6 or to 1.0, but that's not within our purview. And so long as the line remains at 0.3, we understand that the General Assembly expects of us that we will police that line, and we will.
Is there an expected time frame for legislation to be passed to allow federally chartered banks to do business with the hemp industry? We know the Safe Banking Act is out there. That did pass the House recently, which was set to encourage banks to do, and credit card processors, which Charles, you talked about earlier, to do business with hemp-related businesses.
That is the only legislation that I know of, and it actually started as a marijuana bill. And they wanted to, again, it's a Safe Banking Act, basically providing a safe harbor for any banks that offer financial services to the marijuana industry. Hemp was specifically added to that bill to get a couple of representatives on board with it to vote it out of the House. It is sitting on the Senate side, and I don't have any insight of whether the Senate will pick it up or not.
Are efforts being made to uncover potential export opportunities for Kentucky hemp producers and/or processors' products?
As far as opportunities on the export side, I think that a lot of companies are trying to figure out what to do independently. Again, as I was talking about earlier, there was a lot of companies that just came in that either I didn't know about or Joe's team didn't know about, and we joined efforts to see who we were, I guess, who was on our radar. And I think a lot of companies are trying to do this on their own, and they're not reaching out for our help or insight on how to go about it. I will say that a lot of companies that I've worked with in the last 6 months have been foreign. So there's been a lot of companies, a lot of Asian companies that have interest in working here in Kentucky. So I think it's a question for the future, just to see, if more processors become comfortable in reaching out to state government or anyone that can assist them in the future. But that's what I've seen this far on the economic development side.
Excellent, thank you. Is the fulfillment of buying contract issues tied to hemp produced for CBD, or is it prevalent in all contracts for hemp?
If I understand the question correctly, the thrust of it is, are contract payment issues and challenges arising only in the CBD sector or in the others as well? And it is occurring in the others as well. Growth of any industry requires cash, it consumes it. So for a lot of these industry leaders who are trying to make massive investment to enable massive growth, they're flush with they're flush with cash one day and seem to be broke the next. And the one that seems broke today, next thing you know, they're flush with cash. So I think that during this phase of massive expansion, it's really hard to know which potential buyer of your crop as a farmer is going to have the money to pay you at the end of the growing season, which is all the more reason for farmers to approach with caution.
Let me say one more thing.
That said, you do want to have a contract. We have a lot of growers who don't even bother to form a contract for the sale of their crop. They just kind of wildcat it and hope that they're going to find a good buyer on the back end. That is not a recipe for success either. You just need to limit your exposure by not investing more money than you can afford to lose.
Okay, any comment on smokable floral material retail sales being made legal in this state like neighboring states?
I think I know who asked this question. We'll see. It is true that in Kentucky, as a matter of state law, I touched on earlier, floral material and leaf material can only be in the possession of someone who holds a license as a grower or as a processor. So based on that statute, we have interpreted it to mean and put up administrative regulations to say that smokable products like a hemp cigarette or a hemp tea is not legitimate and should not be on the streets here in Kentucky. There are a lot of gas station owners who don't know or don't want to know that that prohibition exists. And it's also true that in some states, including states adjacent to ours, they've taken a very different approach and allowed the sale of those products. So we are aware that this is a tension point. We've been waiting to see what the USDA guidance would look like. It appears that today's guidance is silent on the issue. But that's only one of two big inputs of information that we have to evaluate. The second one, which is to say the FDA's guidance, still hasn't come down yet. It's possible that the FDA could definitively say that the sale of smokable cannabis products is illegal, and that would answer the question for us. And if they don't lay down a clear marker on that, this is a question that the General Assembly will have to decide in 2020 or in some future year.
Yeah, just to add a little comment to that. I mean, I think it's important that everybody keep in mind this is a really, really new industry nationwide. I get questions sometimes, advising clients on these issues, and they'll say, well, gosh, I can walk down to the corner and go into the store, and there's CBD products all over the place, clearly intended for human
consumption, clearly being sold as dietary supplements. Put this in your beverage, it'll make you feel good. Everybody's doing it, why can't I do it? Well, just because everybody's doing it, right, it doesn't mean that that is legal as we sit here today. As we talked about before, FDA has made its position extremely clear. Now, they've gone after 10 companies so far. They've not gone after any retailers so far. They have gone after CBD product manufacturers only so far. So are they beating down everybody's doors who's potentially violating this? No, they're not, and they haven't done that yet. But this is a new industry. There are not clear regulations on this. The FDA is issuing its guidance documentation based on the FDC Act that hasn't been changed at all to address these issues. So,
Yeah, Brad, I agree with everything you just said, 100%. You touched on the fact that about 10 industry participants have received warning letters from the FDA. That's true, and if you look at those letters, they're primarily focused on two categories of bad actors. The first category of bad actors are those manufacturers who are making medical claims about their products without having done any of the medical research it takes to make a claim, like, say, this will cure cancer or this will solve your Alzheimer's problem. If you're a manufacturer and you're making a medical claim about the benefits of your product, you should expect to receive a warning letter from the FDA. Don't be surprised by that. And then the second category of bad actors are people who are making factually incorrect statement on their labels. Our products contain so many milligrams of CBD. Well, if lab testing shows that you don't contain that many milligrams of CBD, you're making a false claim, and you are liable both under federal law and also under state law. It would not surprise me for the next Attorney General of Kentucky, whoever that is, to get active in going after product makers who are selling products based on false representations. I think that's a huge area for activity by an Attorney General in years to come.
yeah, I would encourage anybody involved in the CBD production industry to go to the FDA's website. These warning letters are publicly available. You can see exactly the issues that they're bringing up. So we are just about out of time. If anybody in the audience has any absolutely burning questions that have not been answered today, raise your hand. I'll give you the mic and you can ask the question. Anybody? All right. Well, okay.
My question would be related to the USDA bill that came out today. Didn't make any mention of safety. It was focused primarily on what labs should do, being in a laboratory ourselves. Does Kentucky have any plans of instituting safety with regards to pesticides being found in products, mycotoxins, microbials, anything of that nature? Did they leave that open for states to enforce, do you believe?
I do think that state agencies, including a State Department of Agriculture, would have that authority should they choose to exercise it. And I think that you will see some state departments of agriculture getting involved in that space. I also expect that the EPA will start to flex its muscles in the next 6 to 9 months as well.
Anybody else? All right. Well, with that, can we get a round of applause for our wonderful panelists here today? Thanks everybody so much for being here. This has been approved for CLD